Well, let me ask you then, based on what your dad was saying, you mentioned Jim Crow South. Mm-hmm. Your father, they wouldn't give him work, outright slurring at him. Why don't you? First, I guess the question is, what do you think systemic racism is? And then why would you say there isn't any?
Well, systemic racism means top-down stuff, the way it used to be during Jim Crow. I'd ask you to give me the example of a corporation, Fortune 500 corporation, an institution, college, media, military, where there's top-down racism. You can't come up with it. The media is relentlessly left-wing. Academia, same thing. The military is quite diverse. Give me the name the corporation. Whenever there's a corporation where somebody says something arguably racist, like Texaco did a few years ago, CEO on tape referring to the employees as, I don't think he said N-word, but he said something disparaging. Mm-hmm. Goes on TV, apologizes. Texaco loses hundreds of millions of dollars in equity, and then they end up having a program to advance the careers of the black employees at Texaco. Papa John, remember he was on a call one time. He said something. He was quoting somebody else and said the N-word. Lost his own company. There's a guy named John O'Sullivan. He used to be the editor of the National Review. He said white racism exists, but its social power is weak. The social power against it overwhelming. There's no upside today in any corporation blatantly, openly, even subtly being racist.
So let me get your thoughts on this. I was down covering the Ferguson riots back when the Michael Brown stuff happened, and I did a documentary on what people there referred to as systemic racism. How it was explained to us is St. Louis is actually a very small city. Outside of St. Louis, in St. Louis County, actually, it's right. Like 90 some odd cities.
Right.
These cities were formed when, are you familiar with Pruitt-Igoe? It was one of the first, if not the first, community housing, project housing, and it was in St. Louis. And once it fell into disrepair, you started to get crime in the area, things started to get bad. And white people in St. Louis started to flee the city and then form new surrounding suburbs.
I bet you middle-class blacks also fled the city.
It's possible. Mm-hmm. So what happens today is you have areas that are, you end up seeing racially fractured communities. One area is all white. They had racial covenants, which were eventually made illegal. But then you have, a white grandfather gives it to his son, who gives it to his, his son or whatever. You have areas that are predominantly white, black, or otherwise. What ends up happening is you have impoverished black people as a result of a lot of these policies. Because of the way the cities are set up.
They should move.
Well,
and nothing's stopping them from moving. Move.
We interviewed people and asked them about it, and they said,
"Move." I lived in Cleveland for a number of years, and I remember when I first got there in 1977, there was a newscast of all these white people living in Akron, where there was 25% unemployment, complaining about the steel mills going away, Rust Belt. And I was looking at the television, and I said, "Move, move, move." Move.
But
what's stopping you from moving? Get up
jail,
and
for
move.
Instance. So
what do you mean jail?
So I want to get your thoughts
okay.
on what their accusation are on their claims. What ends up happening is something they call going on tour, where if you have a busted taillight and you drive from your town 4 miles to your job, you go through 4 or 5 cities. Mm-hmm. You get pulled over in each one, you get a ticket in each one, and then you go on tour through their jails where one $20 infraction you can't pay for turns into 4 weekends in jail where they keep trading you to the police stations. So this is what they refer to as remnants of racial covenants, which created multiple jurisdictions, which have a negative impact on people today.
Okay.
We did ask people, why don't you move the area? Well, people who have negative bank accounts, theoretically could just start walking. But I think for a lot of people that they don't know, or it's just not reasonable, I suppose. I'm not saying that is systemic racism. It's what they claim is systemic racism, and it's how...
I of course, followed Ferguson greatly, and the Obama White House comes in, and they accuse the Ferguson PD of being systemically racist for the reasons that you mentioned. It turns out that Ferguson is 67% black, but 85% of the traffic stops were of black people. 18-point gap, ergo systemic racism. Apply that same logic to New York. New York is 25% black, but almost 55% of the traffic stops are for black people. That's a 30-point gap, even bigger than Ferguson, yet NYPD officers, street officers, majority of them are people of color. Turns out that Obama did a study called Race and Traffic Stop, came out in 2013 by the National Institutes of Justice, which is a research arm of the DOJ. And you name the traffic offense, a black motorist was more likely to violate it, whether it was speeding, driving with an expired tag, driving without a proper headlight, driving without a seatbelt, driving without a child safety seat in the back when you have a kid. You name the offense, black motorists were more likely to commit the offense. Stop committing crimes. If your tail light is busted, fix it. Don't expect people to give you some slack just because you're black. Fix it. Take responsibility.
The response we got was that if you have to choose between paying for gas or registering your plate or whatever, people are going to choose probably to pay for the gas to move the car, knowing that they're going to get, they run the risk. The issue is the structure of the jurisdictions turning one infraction into four, which then results in you get a ticket you can't pay. It's $50. You say, well, I couldn't pay for the $20 registration. I can't pay for the $50 fine. So the police come and they say, you're going to spend a weekend in jail then. But the moment you get out of jail, the next department is waiting right outside saying, you're coming to us next. So what they refer to as institutional racism is not that the individual officers are being racist, but that due to the remnants of the past, there are negative consequences for people who live in this jurisdiction today, and they don't know what to do to stop it, solve it, or get out.
Again, I would just say it's a real simple solution. Don't commit crimes. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray died in police custody. Remember, he was the one who was in the van.
Yeah.
There were 6 officers who were prosecuted. 3 of the officers were black. The state attorney who brought the charges was black. City council was all Democrat, majority black. The mayor was black. Number 1, number 2 running the police department, black. The U.S. Attorney General at the time, Loretta Lynch, is black, as was the president. Now, these are black people running the entire system, and still people are talking about it being systemically racist. I'm reminded of that joke that Wanda Sykes said. How are you going to complain about the man when you are the man? And I'd like to know what the officials are in St. Louis, who they are in all these areas. My suspicion is they're regular people trying to do their jobs, and they're not bigots. I just think this is just...
Well, and you can still say the system's broken. You can still say that people should not be dying in police custody. You can still say that cops need better training.
But do them on a case-by-case basis.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It should be case-by-case, and it always has to be all or nothing when we're screaming at each other on Twitter. But like a lot of times, it's not racism. It's that cop didn't train jujitsu and doesn't know how to put on a proper chokehold, or doesn't know when a person is completely out and just needs to be trained.
There's a city in California called Rialto. Rialto is around 100,000 people. Racially, it reflects the demographics of California, the same percentage of Hispanics, blacks, Asians, and whites. And the cops a few years ago were ordered to wear body cams. They didn't want to at first, and they wore them. After a year, what happened? Police complaints fell 90%. And police use of force fell 50%. Not because the police were engaging in any kind of different activity. They behaved as they always were. They've always been trained. Civilians stopped lying on them, and they started complying. And as a result, the police didn't need to use the force anymore. No. They stopped filing lawsuits, and because it's illegal to file a false lawsuit against a cop. So it turns out the civilians were the ones who were making a bunch of false allegations, as did Michael Brown during Ferguson. Michael Brown's friend, who said, "Hands up, don't shoot," turned out to be a complete lie.
Even Obama, it was I think Holder, Eric Holder's Department of Justice
at the time, yeah. And it turns out that the Michael Brown's DNA was on the officer's gun. He tried to get the gun, and his friend, I think his name was Dorian Johnson or something, said that my friend said, "Hands up, don't shoot." And it turns out a complete and total lie. They lied. The police are lied on all the time. And when they got busted because of Rialto, they stopped doing it.
I just wanted to circle back real quick to what you were saying about, actually what Tim was saying about this kind of, when you feel like you're underwater, right? I don't have money to get out of these situations. I think a lot of what we're talking about right now, it's institutional problems, right? It's the government, welfare state. We're doing a lot of talking about them. But for people listening to the show, right? Before you have a kid, before you're ready, or split on the mom, before you end up in a situation. I mean, man, I've been in situations where you just feel like checking out is the only answer, where it's, you're broke and you finally get a thing, and then that falls through, and then you just keep digging. Because man, I was so touched by the story you told about your dad. What's your personal advice? So forget the institutions
it's
right
real,
now.
It's real
to people
simple.
listening.
Probably the most prominent think tank on the left is the Brookings Institution. And one of the ones on the right is called the American Enterprise Institute. They don't agree on anything, but they agree on what they call the millennial success sequence. Finish high school. Ideally one where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. That's why I support school choice. But first of all, finish high school. Don't have a kid until you're 25 years old, until you're 20 years old. Get married before you have the kid. Get a job, keep that job, any job, even a minimum wage job. Don't quit it till you get another job. Within 6 months, you'll get a raise. And finally, avoid the criminal justice system. Committing an act of crime is a voluntary act. You don't have to do it. You follow that formula, you will not be poor and you'll get to the middle class. You don't, there's a very good chance you're going to be poor.
So there's, I agree mostly. I would just say, when it comes to, at least where I grew up, ignorance of the law is no excuse for breaking it. So I, as well as many other people, have found ourselves unwittingly having committed a crime, not realizing it was because it was seemingly innocuous. Mm-hmm. Like when you get a ticket when you're driving in Illinois, you can keep driving. It's no problem. You got a ticket. It's like, so you drive, they take your ID, you keep the ticket. When you get pulled over, you show them the ticket. They say, okay, you pay it off. They send you your ID back. What I didn't know, because they don't tell you this in driver's ed or anything, is that if you get 2 moving violations under the age of 21, they suspend your license. So sure enough, I got a Class A misdemeanor, which was a threat of a year in jail and like a $2,500 fine. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just something I could avoid. I didn't even know it was happening. Mm-hmm. So that took away my ability to drive for like 2 years, because not only was my license suspended, then I got caught driving on a suspended license, which I didn't even know was suspended.
And you couldn't blame systemic racism.
Well,
no, he did.
My point is simply, though, I feel like the system is a simple way to put it is, it might be easy to say avoid the law, but for a lot of people, the system is just busted.
Yeah, well, and same with
these ways, right?
I was just gonna say same with sex education. So much sex education is not the best in this country, and I feel like, especially for if you're pro-life, you should want the best sex education possible so that people don't even get into a situation where they would even want an abortion. So maybe a lot of it does start with education when it comes to the law, when it comes to learning a trade, when it comes to sex education.
I think,
but Tim, it's hard to go to jail. They don't want you to go to jail, especially when you're young. They have all sorts of programs, juvenile programs, diversionary programs. It is hard to go to jail. You've got to commit a crime to go to jail. You've got to hurt somebody to go to jail. It's hard to go to jail. They don't want to put you there. Gavin Newsom released 8,000 convicted felons, some of whom were violent felons because of COVID. They don't want you there. The idea that somebody is hiding behind a tree with a net looking to snare black people is just a lie.
For sure. But and again, I think we're outside of racism at this point. Just talking about I paths to success. Right. I would agree for the most part with you. I think the issue of crime is it's not even about jail. It was about I wasn't able to drive for 2 years on it. For this point, it's like
that'll make it harder to get a job.
I couldn't do anything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I guess I'll go live in the city where I don't need to drive. I had no choice.
You're still in America.
Absolutely.
You're still in America, where people in Cuba are braving shark-infested waters to get here, where people from Haiti are trying to get here, Central America, Mexico. They would love to trade places with us as we sit here and bitch and moan about relatively minor things.
Now, I agree with you on that. My attitude on all this stuff is when you tell people to move, like that's actually what I did. So I did that too. $200 in my pocket, and I found a ride share to California, and I was like, I'll sleep on the beach. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to stay in a bad situation. Right. And so my attitude actually is very much in line with that.
You pick up your cards and play them to the best of your ability. That is your duty. That is your moral obligation.
I thought it was interesting how you talked about not knowing the law about the tail lights or suspended license getting like it's systemic ignorance maybe of the law. But what it makes me think of when I think of systemic racism is that 200 years ago, all these black people from Africa were slaves, and they were intentionally not educated. They were intentionally not taught to read and write. Then they were eventually let out or whatever. Slavery ended. They had kids. They didn't know how to read and write. They didn't know how to teach their kids. The kids didn't know how to read and write. Then they had kids. And for the most part, education is passed down generation through the family. Without that, we have a systemic ignorance problem. But they call it racism just because they happen to have been from Africa, those slaves. They could have been... They could have been like Italian, they just weren't at that time. But maybe there was a reason that their skin color was dark. I just don't think it's a skin color issue.
I think that's a good point. I think the implication today is, often what I talk to people about is the policies of racism have been made illegal. And you actually there are people who make money suing whenever they perceive it. Like right now you've got these selected videos where a Muppet person won't hug a black kid. But they don't show you the videos where the Muppet people don't hug the white kids either and things like that.
They're just very bad Muppets, you guys.
or whatever you call them. I don't know if they're Muppets. It's just like the mascots
it's Rosita, and it took place at Sesame Place in Philadelphia. And there's videos showing Rosita high-fiving white kids, ignoring black kids. And when somebody made the video, put it on web, it went viral. And a bunch of other people who went to Sesame Place over the years found videos where this thing was happening. So maybe something is going on there. But my problem is this. The $25 million class action lawsuit been filed. Jesse Jackson writes a letter to Sesame Place, accuses them of engaging in systemic racism. The family that filed the lawsuit is from Baltimore. Philadelphia has had black mayors. The police chief is a black female. The superintendent of school is a black person. The family from Baltimore files a lawsuit, as I mentioned. There are 13 public high schools in Baltimore where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. 0%, 13 high schools. Another half a dozen where 1% can. That's half of all the high schools in Baltimore where the kids in the inner city are either 0 proficient in math or only 1% are proficient. Jesse Jackson said nothing about that. He said nothing about the fact that Philadelphia, where Sesame Place is on track to register the highest number of murders in the city's history. Most of them are black. Jackson says nothing about that, but he goes ballistic over some 4-year-old kid not being high-fived by Rosita. It's ridiculous. And whether or not this kid responds to this in a sensible way depends entirely upon the parent to put it in perspective. Where's Jackson on these other things? Nowhere.
Do you think that leads to more people taking actual racism less seriously?
So, absolutely it does.
Because if
it trivializes the whole word racism.
Well, and that's what I was wondering. And that's been one of the things that has gotten me so just over so much of the left. It's that if you start conflating a sexist joke with sexual assault, if you start conflating the Muppet thing with, actual hate crimes, then you're getting all of these people that are just gonna suddenly they hear the word racism and they go, oh, what, like that stupid Muppet thing, and you're essentially you're taking away any meaning from it, because I don't think you're saying that racism isn't real, but the problem is if we're talking about these fake stories, then we can't actually come up with solutions about what to do with real racism. And I thought about our friend Bill Ottman, who did the Minds Convention that we all performed at, and he actually had, because you were talking about a lot of black intellectuals not going on your show, but he had Coleman Hughes on a panel with Cornel West, and it was awesome because they were respectful to each other and they were both looking for solutions. And I think it is so cowardly of Democratic black intellectuals not to go on your show, because it shouldn't be about we're just going to shout talking points at each other. If you care about racism, you want all voices from all political sides to be like, hey man, there's a problem, what do we do to fix it?
But let me just say, as you mentioned, you've got murder, you've got homicide, but what are these lawyers going for? Perceived slights at a wealthy theme park or something. Maybe it's just for the lawsuits.
Well, not wealthy. We were poor and couldn't afford Disney World.
Jamie, I did C-SPAN yesterday for 2 hours. And a guy calls up, black guy, and he says, I watch a lot of black talk show hosts, and I never see you on any of them.
Yeah.
I never see you on Roland Martin's show, he said. I never see you on any of the other shows. And I said, well, I debated Roland Martin before the election. I killed him.
Sure.
He has a radio show. He's never invited me on it. Charlemagne the God has a very popular show.
Yeah, no, I know it.
Reached out to him to have him come on my radio show. Didn't hear back. I was on a flight a few months ago with a guy named Bill Bellamy sat next to me. He's he's comedian. Comedian and actor.
Grew up watching him.
And we had a long conversation. And he said, one of my friends is Charlemagne the God. Why don't you go on his show? And I said, can you set that up? He said, yeah, I can do that. We exchanged information. I never heard back.
Yeah.
Now, we only do just show up, knock on the door, say, hey, interview me.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. You got to be invited.
Yeah.
Tim invited me on his show. I didn't just show up.
That would have been awesome.
Hi, Tim.
That would have been great. Yeah.
Got 2 hours?
Yeah. If you showed up randomly, knocked on the door, we'd roll out the red carpet.
Great.
You'd be invited.
That would have been so funny.
Joy Reid hasn't had me on his show. The View hasn't had me on. Invite me. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm easy to find.
We have gotten to a point where everything is so tribalized that the idea of having a black conservative, people are just so used to, I scream my talking points at you, you scream your talking points at me, instead of like, hey man, no, if we all want the best for these struggling communities, then you need to hear a diversity of opinions.
Absolutely. There's a magazine called Ebony. Ebony, for a time, was the most popular black magazine. Came out once a month. It still comes out, but doesn't have the same power it has right now, owned by a different family. And every year they had a feature, Jamie, called the 100 Most Influential Black Americans.
Yeah.
And every year, excluded from that list were Clarence Thomas, Thomas Sowell, who is absolutely brilliant. He was once called by David Mamet, the playwright, America's greatest contemporary philosopher.
Wow.
Not included in Ebony. And Walter Williams, the first and only black person that I know of to be the chairman of an economics department of a non-historically black college.
Well, they needed.
They
room
don't
for
even know
Flavor
who
Flav.
these people are.
Yeah, I didn't know Thomas Sowell. I didn't. Yeah, and I knew Clarence Thomas is like the pube guy. Like that. That's all we're told on the left. You know what I mean? Where even if you disagree with him, it's like, whoa, you still have a black person on the Supreme Court.
How do you exclude somebody who's on the Supreme Court
I know.
from one of the most influential black people in America?
No, I agree.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
But they did it every single year. And of course, I was never in it, and a bunch of other people who are younger black conservatives were never in it.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.